Washington's got some more big-time prospects coming to campus.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's the site editor with Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And Lars, got some big news. We got a whole lot of recruit movement to get into. We got one player who has pushed his official visit from May 31st to June 21st, but we're going to get to that one in the second segment because there are four new, a couple of them being not so new visitors that will be on campus on May 31st. We're going to run through them real quick, and then we're going to dive into them one at a time, where the first two guys are guys we've covered on the show for a decent amount. The first is four-star wide receiver Andrew Marsh, he's coming to Washington. Nope, visiting Penn State. Now sounds like he will be coming to Washington. All this was first reported by Tom Loy over at 247 Sports. We were able to reach out and get some secondary confirmation from some people that we talked to. The next is four-star safety linebacker hybrid Matai Tagoa'i, who is one of my favorite prospects in this class. Love watching his film. The third is four-star defensive lineman Smith Orogbo, four-star prospect from Texas, who is really, really intriguing. And I really like his film a lot, and is somebody that I think is somebody, Lars, you and I are going to have a very, very fun conversation about him. And the fourth is another defensive lineman from Texas, and somebody who, Lars, I can't say I'm surprised to see him visit, but just impressive with some of the way the coaching staff has recruited the defensive line. And that's Chace Sims from Randall, Texas, another just three-star prospect who also has some really high upside on film, and especially in this class where defensive tackle is really, really important. Where do you want to start here?
Let's start at defensive tackle, because that one to me was the one, when you looked at the four additions, that really was the true addition. When you look at the other three guys that already either previously looked at a visit or at least had interest in Washington, Chance had the offer from Washington back in, I believe, February, but there didn't seem to be a ton of momentum publicly in terms of getting him on campus. He visited LSU, has been to some other schools, but to get a guy from Texas, when you look at 6'3", 310, 320, 300 pounds, somewhere in that range, those are the types of guys that you need to go and get, especially as you mentioned, the defensive line class is not the greatest, especially on the interior on the West Coast. So that means you have to go to the Midwest and go to the Southeast and find some of these guys. And Texas does kind of seem to be that happy medium destination for Washington in terms of, even under Chris Peterson, right, Kalen DeBoer, even Jimmy Lake, that seemed to be a destination for Washington to go out of the region without having to extend their resources to a school like state like Florida or Maryland or some school far east, where you really kind of have to hope that there's a legitimate interest there, because otherwise the coaching staff going all the way out to East Coast and then to not get them, that doesn't really do anything for me. But when you look at his tape, as you mentioned, that to me seems like a guy where I'm true, not a plug and play guy, but a guy that you can just leave on the interior. You know what you're going to get. I'm curious to see how once he gets into a college strength program, could he even add a little more speed to his pass rush and things like that? Sure. But right off the bat, to me, when you can go get a guy from Texas, and I know people are going to say, oh, it's a 3-star. Anybody having lived in Euless, Texas for a brief period of time, anybody that plays high school football in the state of Texas, the competition level and the way that they're built up is so much different than so many other places in the country. And even for California, where see a guy that's a 3-star in California wouldn't necessarily be a 4-star in Texas, whereas a 3-star in Texas could be a 4-star in California. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but that's why when some of these guys, you look at them and say, oh, the ranking doesn't necessarily do anything for me. Just turn on the tape. That's really what the coaches are doing here.
Absolutely. And that's so much more important. It's something that you and I have harped on just over the course of all this, where this coaching staff is doing the right thing and just has the perfect mix of watching the film and looking at the rankings, because they want to make sure that this is a pretty highly rated class. And Smith Orogbo is another guy that's just the perfect mesh of that, where super highly rated in the top 200 nationally, and also just has spectacular film, where he's listed as a defensive lineman by 247 Sports, is 6'4", 220 pounds, but certainly has the room to put a lot of weight on his frame. And this is one of those guys, Lars, where I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of those, tweener type interior, exterior, by the time he actually gets up to weight at the college level, where I don't know if I look at him as a true edge rusher or a true interior guy, kind of in a Voit Tanufi mold in a way. But this is another one of those guys where he's got some big time offers. He's got some big time visits set where he's going to be going to Texas. He's going to be taking a visit to Oklahoma. He's got a Texas Tech visit set. But this is one guy where I look at him and I just say, I'm really impressed with this coaching staff. And we can say the same thing about Matai Tagoa'i and Andrew Marsh, who've been big targets for a while. We knew that. But with a guy like Smith Orogbo to go down there and just even get this kid up for a visit. If they don't end up getting commitment from him, we got to see how the class plays out. But making sure that you stay in the mix is such a testament to this entire coaching staff and to all their off-field recruiting personnel as well, who have been pushing and pushing and pushing to make sure that they retain and just create these relationships with these high-level prospects. Where we've got some comments saying, oh yeah, this class isn't very highly rated yet. Yeah, there are 5 prospects in this class right now. It's expected to be a big class. And if they're developing these relationships with a lot of these highly ranked prospects like Smith Orogbo, and you can turn some of them into commits, that's going to do nothing but benefit you in the long run. And it's just impressive to see what they're doing. And that's been the theme of the show all week, right? It's closing time. It's time to close on some of these prospects. And he's one where I wouldn't necessarily say he's at the top of my board in terms of I think they're going to close him immediately, but that's certainly going to be a name I'm keeping an eye on.
Yeah, this is the case where you can't get a commit until you get your foot in the door. And this is Washington getting its foot in the door. And when we talk about, I agree that he's not necessarily a true edge rusher because he's 6'4", 220. I'm curious if he plays at like 245, 250 after he gets into a college weight program, where does he truly end up playing? Because some of those guys, you don't want to add too much weight. But the one thing that I like about this visit coming in, Washington is not afraid to swing against some big competition. When you look at who he's listed, Oklahoma, Texas, there's a number of colleges that he's looking at. If you're Washington, some previous staffs would say, okay, well, do we actually have a shot? Oh, we don't. We have an outside shot, and it's not worth it. It's like, what happens again in a year and a half if he wants to transfer out of Texas or wherever he ends up going? And you had that prior relationship, that's how you get those kids to come out in terms of, okay, it didn't work at your first school. We didn't burn that relationship and we didn't just cast you aside, because talent is talent. And when you look at especially defensive line talent, those are a lot harder to come by than the skill position, the receivers, even running backs, and honestly, even quarterbacks. Like, I think defensive line is one of the harder positions to truly find and develop in the college ranks. And so when you do identify a guy like that, you got to go to Texas. You got to go to some of these other states and put up a fight. We saw Washington even in the transfer portal where, you lost out to, an SEC school in Auburn for Philip Bleedy and a couple of others, but you still got to go and pick up the bat and take a swing. You can't just say, oh, well, we didn't get him. Let's go find some like junior college guy and just fill it that way and say we got the guy we actually wanted. Well, there's a reason why everybody wants the talented players, because talent attracts talent, and the most talented rosters usually more often than not are going to be the ones playing for a national championship and certainly the college football playoff.
Absolutely. And that's, you could say the same thing about just the way they developed this relationship with Andrew Marsh, who this 100% of the credit goes to Kevin Cummings, where Kevin Cummings has done such a great job just establishing that relationship. And he's one of those guys that, exactly as you just said, stepped up to the plate and took a swing, where he took some big swings and has done a really good job of getting some of these players on campus, where Chris Lawson and Philip L. were two guys that were very interested on Kalen DeBoer. I don't want to say that, getting those guys on campus for an official is a layup, but it certainly isn't is Raiden Weisbright in the same boat, where he had visited a couple of times where we knew he was interested. It's again, still not a layup, where especially with the offer list that all three of those guys have, but going out and saying, all right, I'm going to go get a visit from Donovan Olakbudi and I'm going to get a visit from Andrew Marsh, is just a full credit to just the relationships that he's been able to build with those guys. And Lars, speaking of relationships, Robert Ball has been able to do some pretty good things on the recruiting trail as well. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel, because it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. And FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big one of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and gotta get it in now. The Celtics advanced to the NBA Finals. So great to see the official team of Locked On Huskies continuing to just, go at their run. Love to see, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Drew Holiday. Those are three guys, if you're looking at the futures numbers for NBA Finals MVP, those future odds, that's where I'd probably put my money right now if you think the Celtics are going to win it all. So, Lars, Robert Balla is another one of Washington's new linebackers coach who came here by way of Alabama. It's another guy who's just done a really, really good job on the recruiting trail. We're going to get to Matai Tagoa'i because that's another guy that we should probably spend a couple of minutes on and just discuss where linebackers, are going to be prioritized in this class, what the ranking order is. But one guy who seems to have a spot solidified is four-star linebacker Christian Thatcher from Arborview High School in Las Vegas. Somebody who I spoke to as the everydayers listened to this on Wednesday. I spoke to him on Tuesday, and I asked him, I said, it looks like because he's pushed his visit from May 31st to June 21st. And I asked him, I said, is there any particular reason? He said, it fits my schedule a little bit better, and I wanted to make sure that Washington was my last visit. And he's somebody who we've discussed on the show before, had a really, really strong relationship with Jedd Fisch during his time in Arizona, almost committed to him down there, and has also where he's developed a really nice relationship with Robert Balla and Steve Belichick, but has had a really, really strong relationship with defensive quality control coach Aaron Van Horn. So it seems like he's one of those guys who certainly has a spot if he wants it, and it looks like he wants to make sure all of his options are being explored, but he does have a crystal ball to commit to Washington, which is certainly going to be something to keep an eye on. But looking at the rest of this class, Washington is certainly going to take 3 linebackers. I don't know about 4, unless one of them is a tweener where, maybe he ends up as an edge rusher kind of guy, or maybe even as a safety. But we look at the other guys that are visiting. Madden Faraimo, who we discussed on yesterday's show. We look at Matai Tagoa'i, Zadrius Rainey-Sale, Mark Hanacor, where Tagoa'i, because Zadrius Rainey-Sale, the one-time Washington commit, we know what his skill set is. And if he wants to commit to Washington, that's one of those no-brainer takes. And I would say the same thing really about all the guys that I just listed off. But Tagoa'i is the one where I'm keeping an eye on, just like the theme of the show yesterday, which was athletes. Is this the guy where you just take him, you try him at linebacker, maybe you try him at safety, and you see where he fits best?
I don't hate it. I mean, in terms, this is
Sure.
Again, this is carrying over from what we said at the end of last segment. Just get the talent on the roster. This is a no doubt talent take in terms of if you took every player on a roster aside from quarterbacks and said quarterbacks and athletes, just get the most talented roster. That's why you would take Matai Tagoa'i. In terms of whether you think he's a safety or a linebacker, figure out that problem a year from now. Figure out that problem 2 years from now. It doesn't necessarily matter. But when you also, the more that I think about it, when you look at how this visit is lined up, the only other linebacker coming in this weekend aside from Tagoa'i is Cyrus Palu, who is a little bit different than both a Mark Hanacor, a Zadrius Rainey-Sale. And so I think having all 3 of those other kind of, I don't want to say true linebackers, but let's just, for lack of a better word, when you get Thatcher, Hanacor, and Rainey-Sale all on the same weekend at the end of June, I think that bodes well for Washington in terms of
absolutely.
You can let Matai come in and figure out how he wants to handle this weekend in terms of where does he fit in, how does he feel with the staff, all that sort of thing, because he's committed to USC as we noted. So he hasn't decommitted. Taking the visit, which again expresses interest. So for me, this could be, and I know this is not the greatest example, but in a way, the Ace Eternal situation where do I want to play safety? Do I want to play linebacker? USC has me, and it's not a bad thing one way or another, as we've discussed in terms of you could have a preference to say, hey, you know what, I want to play safety at USC, and if it doesn't work out, I can portal and I'll come to Washington or I'll go to wherever. In terms of if it doesn't work, that's why having the portal in this day and age, everything comes down to relationship. So clearly, they have a relationship with Tagoa'i. Clearly, they have a relationship with a lot of these guys, and now it's just a matter of the relationship fit combination. And even if they make it, all these guys could commit to Washington, and theoretically, it still doesn't matter until December.
Absolutely. And that's certainly a great point. So I have to circle back here and talk about the on-field fit a little bit, because I have to go to my old reliable bag here of how does he fit in a Steve Belichick defense. And this is a really, really fun one to study, because I love his tape. I really, really like his tape at San Clemente. And he's somebody who lines up a lot as an inside linebacker, but he also lines up a lot as an edge rusher. And he's playing a very similar role to what Jahlani Tavai did with the New England Patriots, where it's a lot of inside linebacker, but he plays on the edge sometimes. He does a lot of different things. He can drop back into coverage when need be. And one of the fun things about having a guy like that play inside linebacker is just the way that he utilizes his speed, especially when you walk him all the way down and you want him to blitz off the edge. Because one of the things that stands out is his just absolutely elite first step is the ball is snapped and that dude's already in the backfield. He's just that quick. And that's something where, yeah, that'd be helpful at safety if you want to walk him down, play him in run support, do whatever else. But I like that one with him in particular, a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage, where, and this is why I was so excited about Steve Belichick outside of my obvious New England Patriots bias, as the everydayers know and love. But it's the fact that all of these guys can be so multiple. It's the fact that you're never going to just be pigeonholed into one thing. And I hate that I have to keep using that word, but it's the only one that works, where there are a lot of teams that have done this really well. I feel like high schools are a little bit better at deploying this than some college and even some NFL defensive coordinators, because it's so much easier to just put an athlete in the best position to succeed. But that's exactly what the Patriots have done for so long, is put their guys in the best positions to succeed. That's why the defense has been so good every year. And Matai and Zadrius Rainey-Sale and Madden Faraimo and Christian Thatcher and Mark Hennecore and whoever it is that ends up committing to Washington are going to have that same opportunity. And the question, Lars, is which linebackers do you think Robert Bala is going to prioritize? Because he does really seem to be doing an awesome job on the recruiting trail.
This isn't necessarily going to answer your question. I'm not sure he's necessarily prioritizing one over another. He's prioritizing groups. These are like the top 5 groups. Of these, if they were to miss on, let's say, 3 out of 5, then there's potentially a kind of second tier. But when you look at these 4 or 5 guys that they could take, a linebacker / safety, whichever one you want to call it, it just becomes down to the old adage: whoever commits first gets the spot.
Sure.
And the one way to answer your question is Robert Bala is equally building a relationship with all of these guys. He's not just saying, oh, you know what, I'm going to put all my chips in the Thatcher Rainey-Sale basket. I'm going to put all my chips in the Tagoa'i flip basket. He's basically putting every single equal amount of chips. Now, again, he can't talk on the record about this, but if you were to talk about this on the record, he might say, I wouldn't mind the in-state guy staying home, and I wouldn't mind getting a Nevada kid or a California. You could kind of pick one of those two, but clearly from every indication, he doesn't have a preference in terms of, I don't want this guy unless it's an emergency take. And it kind of lines up with when you look at their film, when you look at their talent, any one of the 5 are a good take. You only need 3 of the 5, 4 of the 5. And even with Cyrus Palu, who we haven't necessarily talked a ton about because he's a different type of linebacker in a way, still even addressing that, all these guys, they're willing to take them. And so if you took Thatcher, Sale, and a Hennecore, or Thatcher, Sale, and Palu, I don't necessarily think taking one of those guys in terms of, and when you look at it and say, okay, well, that one was the safe take. No, these are guys are all, that the staff wants them to play for Washington. It's just a matter of who's going to take that spot first. And when you have such high talent, none of these guys are going to be in a rush to make a decision.
I just had an epiphany of sorts where I've been thinking about, like, is there any good way to compare it? And as you were saying that, it all just hit me. Lars, do you remember the last time Washington took 4 linebackers in a class? Be 2019, and the 4 linebackers that they took, there were 2 4-stars and 2 3-stars. The 2 4-stars were Daniel Haimuli and Josh Calvert. The 2 3-stars, do you remember the 2 3-stars? Mickey Ayu and Alfonso Tuputala. So it's really interesting when you think about it in that light, where I mean, Alfonso Tuputal's had the longest career at Washington, where Daniel Haimuli's gone on, done some things, and Josh Calvert had some injuries, Mickey Ayu had some injuries, but it's one of those things where you just get the talent in the room and let it play out. And they have the availability to do that, where we don't know what it's going to look like in the front seven. Or I put out a piece about Washington's perfect front seven class. There were 8 bodies in there, and 3 of them were at linebacker. There were 3 edges and 2 defensive tackles. Go check that out over on Huskies Wire. But I could certainly see a case where this team takes 4 linebackers because they're losing 4 linebackers. And if you want to just reload like that, it's not the worst thing in the world. I don't know if that's necessarily what Robert Bala and Jedd Fisch and Steve Belichick want to do, but it's possible. And it's something that you can certainly figure out, but it's just a matter of getting all these guys in the door. And you figure it out once you're there. And as you said, no matter who it is, it seems like this coaching staff has done a really good job to get in position to, even be a hat on the table. But now it's about being more than a hat on the table. Now it's about closing the deal. And Lars, it feels like in this class, there's no more important place to do that than along the defensive line. And, we talked a little bit about Smith Orogbo. We talked a little bit about Chace Sims. And I feel like we should stay in that boat as well, but we should also talk about some of these other guys that are visiting. And one of them who we really haven't talked much about yet is Caleb Smith.
Yeah, this is one where I've mentioned him a couple of times on the show, was one of the early offers for the staff. Actually, when Jedd Fisch and Armand Hawkins made the staff before Robert Bala and Vinny Sunseri were hired, and the defensive staff was finalized, I believe, because it was a really interesting offer going out to 3 Alabama recruits at the same high school, and Caleb Smith was the third one. I talked to him before he came up for his visit. He expressed immediate interest in terms of wanting to get up for a visit, which off the bat, a kid from Alabama, 6'4", 235, 245, defensive lineman. Yeah, you want to get those guys. Where is he a 4-star? No, but that's also because he plays with a teammate that's a 4-star who kind of draws some of the attention away from him. So that's worth acknowledging, because that's no slight to Caleb Smith. Big fan of this film. And you go watch his tape, you can see why the coaches like him. And I think anytime you can start to lay the foundation for recruiting in the Southeast, recruiting a little bit East Coast, this is the perfect type to do that. Where I remember when he got the offer from Washington, he wanted to get it for a visit. Came up in April for an unofficial visit. Is coming back in May for an official visit. 3 visits for a kid that didn't really know much about Washington, or 2 visits for a kid that didn't know much about Washington before Jedd Fisch took over.
Right.
To me, like that's a good indication in terms of this. Again, gets back to is he a true edge or is he a defensive lineman? I think he's a little more of an interior guy than an edge, but yeah. I can go either way with it in terms of with the size. I can go either way, but
100%.
When you look at the talent coming in, these are the type of guys that you have to go and find. Where just because you want to get the 5-star and the 4-star at some high school that also has a 3-star, you're not taking the 3-star just to hope to get the 4 and 5-star. When you look at his tape, this is a guy that probably in any other school, in any other situation, could be a 4-star after his senior year when he gets, a couple things improved and refined in his game. But you can't coach size. And there is a different mentality when you get kids from the South that they're hungrier. And that's no disrespect to the kids on the West Coast, but you just see that time and time again where there's a different trait and a different mentality that comes from getting some of those type of guys. And when you add all that talent up at Washington, that's what makes it a really good defense, because you have a several different body types to work with different types of playing experiences.
So one thing that you mentioned there, because you talked about just having other stars around him at his high school. One person, I feel like we mentioned this briefly on another show, but it's certainly worth diving in depth a little bit more on, is one of the players he plays alongside is 4-star defensive tackle Jordan Thomas, who's committed to Auburn. And because I remember watching his film and just thinking about, because as you were saying, this is what I was thinking about, where you're right, in any other defense, he would have a little bit more experience as a nose tackle or just as a true defensive tackle. But with the talent around him, it's pushed him out to the edge just so that the 2 guys can play next to each other. It looks like it's a little bit of a scheme thing from what it is they do down there, but I really like that they're having him do that, because it just kind of shows the versatility and the athleticism that he has. But at the same point, it's forcing him to do things a little bit differently than it will at the college level, which when he gets to the next level, whether it's Washington or not, of course, we're talking about this in the hypothetical world that he is coming to Washington, but it just does nothing but add to his value. And even though, as you said, he is a 3-star prospect, it's one of those things where you watch the film and you look at just all of what his skill set is. These are all things that very easily translate to the college level and will make him very valuable in the eyes of a defensive coordinator. And, we talked about Josiah Sharma a lot. I feel like we need to move to the edge where there aren't, any big time edge prospects coming up this weekend outside of 3-star Devin Hyde, who's somebody I'm really intrigued by. He's got a really nice frame. I like his film a little bit. There are guys like Hayden Lowe that I watch and I just say, oh, that guy's at the top of my list. That guy's just got elite, just get off. Just some of the things he does just as a pass rusher already are really, really impressive. But Devin Hyde is, I don't want to say he's closer than some people think, but he's certainly up there. And I'm not surprised that the coaching staff has prioritized him. And he's one guy that I'm really intrigued by. If he's one of the first guys that ends up committing over the course of this weekend, where I had him right up there with Christian Thatcher, who now has moved his visit back, I wouldn't be surprised if Devin Hyde is one of the guys that does end up committing relatively soon to Washington and just trying to just snatch up one of those spots, because he's a talented guy with a really nice frame. And I think the coaching staff and Jason Kafusi could do some really nice things with him.
Yeah, this is another guy that came up for an unofficial visit during spring practices, because I remember seeing him standing on the sideline thinking, who's this relatively tall and athletic, could be a tight end, could be a linebacker, could be a defensive end, could be an edge rusher. And then you go and look at his tape and it's just, okay, the offers necessarily are there but aren't there. But sometimes, how many times have we seen this in recruiting where a big school gets in early or gets a commitment, and then over the next 2 months, out of nowhere, 5 to 10 Power 5 schools offer, Power 4 now.
Yeah.
But FBS level, legitimately, not elite programs, but those other big 4 programs start to chase after some of these guys. It's a testament to Washington getting in the boat early, getting these relationships developed. And it's really kind of one of the hallmarks and themes that's going to be on the show, just kind of moving forward, is this staff is really interested and really devoted to developing relationships. And there's not necessarily a preference as to, okay, well, we want this guy over Devin. It's, well, this staff isn't, that's one thing I think we both can agree. This staff doesn't over offer. They're not going to offer a kid just to say, oh yeah, okay, I guess we'll bring you up on an official because we made the offer and things like that. This is a guy where, it doesn't scream wow, but I think, again, in 2 or 3 years could be a consistent contributor, thinking, yes, hey, that was actually an underrated get at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And then, so this is going to sound silly, but hear me out here. He's a lot like taking an in-state kid, where he goes to Menlo Atherton. He's a California kid, but he has spoken at length about how his mom is a UW alum and that he has a lot of connections and just ties to the city of Seattle and the University of Washington itself. And it's one thing that, I feel like we've talked about for a while, is there are no better sells for the University of Washington than those who already have ties to it. And if you get somebody like that in the boat early, it's really easy for him to talk about, I've watched UW for a long time. My mom went there. I know it can be really successful for me, not just as a football team, but as a university as well, and get a nice degree from there. And these are all things that he's spoken about. And just having a guy like that in the boat where he can talk about these, I don't want to say unique, but original experiences that, his family has had through their time at the University of Washington, it can do nothing but help down the road.
And you think about having a guy like that on campus with a kid like Caleb Smith, who's coming from well across the other side of the country, and you're talking about getting kids from Texas on the roster with Dash Beerley and Jake Flores, 2 commits. That to me is like, hey, get these eclectic mix of kids around each other and in a way, let them sort it out in terms of a coach can recruit you and do certain things. But a lot of times, and this as well as I do, when these kids talk to current players on campus, that's where actually most of the information comes from. Most of the kids will be like, look, man, and by the way, it speaks to the health of the program and the dissolvement of another in terms of if the players aren't giving coaches ringing endorsements or not really having an effort or role in recruiting. Jedd is clearly taking the indication, hey, We want our freshmen and redshirt freshmen and even potentially sophomores to recruit some of these guys because you're going to be playing with them. You're going to be the ones on the roster for 2 or 3 years. There's no point in having, no offense, if Peaches Prysock talk to, now again, you could have him talk to Dijon Lee, but you want to also have guys like Curly Reed, Caleb Presley, some of the younger guys in that room also have those conversations because it gets the kids a more rounded understanding of, okay, you worked with him at Arizona. You guys were here at Washington. You can tell me about the staff. You can tell me about playing at Washington. And it's a perfect mix to get all those two because Jedd can't explain Washington last season, can't explain what it's like to be a student athlete at Washington, but he can tell you how he's going to coach you at Washington and what he did at Arizona and things like that. So it's always important to get a mixture of people and personalities on campus for these visits because, you can wow a kid in certain ways. You can pull him up to a Lamborghini dealership and do all these sort of things, but that doesn't mean anything. You got to walk out that tunnel on Saturday or Friday night and say, hey, you know what? These guys that I met on my visit, I'm now suiting up for. And it really does kind of put validation behind, hey, we are a family. We are the 33rd team and all that sort of thing. All the stuff that Jedd Fisch is selling becomes legitimate with the way that he's doing it.
Yeah. Lars, with that being said, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the videos for tuning in. We really do appreciate your constant support. Tune in tomorrow. We're going to have a really fun chat with lockdown recruiting expert Brian Smith, who's going to help us break down just so many of these prospects that we've, just continued to discuss because, hey, we're going to see how many they might be able to reel in over the course of the weekend. And until then, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel, new content every single day. Make sure you like the video. Click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new episode. And make sure if you got any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, drop a comment right down below. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Thursday.